The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood in the corridor outside the Queen's former private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a cream-colored envelope that had arrived that morning, bearing the official seal of Buckingham Palace. The weight of its contents pressed heavily on her heart, and she knew that what she was about to share would change everything for the royal family. Catherine had always been known for her composure and grace under pressure. Since marrying Prince William, she had navigated the complexities of royal life with remarkable poise. But today, as she prepared to deliver news that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy, she felt the burden of responsibility weighing on her shoulders like never before. The letter in her hands contained information that had been kept secret for months. Palace officials, doctors, and senior members of the royal household had been working tirelessly to manage a situation that threatened to expose vulnerabilities within the royal family that the public had never imagined. Catherine had been chosen to be the bearer of this news because of her unique position as both an outsider who had married into the family and someone who had earned the deep respect and trust of every family member. Prince Charles, now King Charles III, had been struggling with health issues that went far beyond what the public knew. While official statements spoke of routine procedures and minor ailments, the reality was far more serious. The stress of ascending to the throne, combined with the ongoing pressures of modernizing the monarchy while maintaining its traditions, had taken a severe toll on his physical and mental well-being. Catherine had witnessed firsthand the private moments when the king's facade of strength would crack. She had seen him in the early morning hours, sitting alone in his study, staring at photographs of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, with tears streaming down his face. She had observed the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking, and how he would sometimes pause mid-sentence during private conversations, as if struggling to find the words or remember what he was saying. The medical team had been discreet, conducting examinations and tests away from the prying eyes of the media. But the results had been sobering. The king was facing a condition that would require him to step back from many of his duties, potentially permanently. The implications were staggering, not just for Charles personally, but for the entire line of succession and the future of the monarchy itself. Princess Anne had always been the rock of the royal family. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and unwavering dedication to duty, she had supported her brother through every challenge he had faced, and had been their mother's favorite, though this was never spoken aloud, and she had inherited Queen Elizabeth's sense of duty and resilience. She worked tirelessly, often completing more royal engagements in a year than any other family member, and she did so without complaint or fanfare. But and had her own struggles that she kept hidden from the world. The pressure of being the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, the weight of maintaining the family's reputation during scandals and controversies, and the personal sacrifices she had made for the crown had all taken their toll. She had given up personal happiness multiple times for the sake of duty, and now, approaching her later years, she was beginning to question whether the sacrifices had been worth it. Catherine had noticed changes in Princess Anne over the past few months. The older woman, usually so sharp and quick with her responses, had seemed distracted and melancholy during family gatherings and would often stare off into the distance, as if lost in memories of better times. She had begun talking more frequently about their mother, sharing stories that revealed a vulnerability that few people ever saw in the Princess Royal. The relationship between Catherine and had not always been easy. When Catherine first joined the family, and had been skeptical of this commoner who had captured Prince William's heart, and had seen other outsiders come into the family and struggle with the demands of royal life. And she had been protective of William, knowing how much he had suffered after his mother's death. But over the years, Catherine had proven herself time and again, and had come to respect and even love her daughter-in-law. It was this hard-earned trust that made Catherine the perfect person to deliver the news that would devastate Princess Anne. The letter in Catherine's hands contained not just information about the king's health, but also revelations about decisions that had been made without his knowledge. Decisions that would affect her role in the royal family and her future responsibilities in ways she had never imagined. The palace had been preparing for various scenarios regarding the king's health for months. Contingency plans had been drawn up, roles had been reassigned, and preparations had been made for a transition that might need to happen sooner than anyone wanted. But in all of these preparations, one crucial element had been overlooked: Princess Anne's feelings and her right to be involved in decisions that would affect her deeply. Catherine knocked softly on the door of the sitting room, where she knew Princess and was reviewing correspondence. Anne's voice called out for her to enter, and Catherine stepped into the warm, wood-paneled room that Anne had made her own. The walls were lined with photographs of Anne's equestrian achievements, her charitable work, and family moments spanning decades. Princess Anne looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a slight smile crossing her face when she saw Catherine. "My dear, what brings you here on such a dreary afternoon?" Anne asked, setting down her pen and giving Catherine her full attention. Catherine's throat felt dry as she approached Anne's desk. She had rehearsed what she would say dozens of times, but now, faced with the woman who had become like a mother figure to her, the words seemed inadequate. "And I need to speak with you about something very important," Catherine began, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Anne's expression immediately became more serious. She had been in the royal family long enough to recognize when something significant was about to be discussed. "Please sit down," Anne said, gesturing to the comfortable chair across from her desk. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Catherine sat down, still clutching the envelope. She looked at Anne, this remarkable woman who had dedicated her entire life to service, who had been a pillar of strength for the royal family through every crisis, and she felt her heart breaking for what she was about to reveal. "It's about Charles," Catherine said softly, "about his health, and about decisions that have been made." Anne's face went pale, and she leaned forward her chair. "What kind of decisions?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine opened the envelope with shaking hands and began to read. The letter detailed the king's condition, the prognosis, and the timeline for his gradual withdrawal from public duties. But it was the second part of the letter that would devastate him. The palace, in consultation with the Prime Minister and senior advisors, had decided that Prince William would need to take on additional responsibilities immediately, effectively becoming Prince Regent in all but name. More shocking still was the decision about Princess Anne's own future. The letter revealed that the royal family had decided to transition Anne into a more ceremonial role, reducing her public engagements and limiting her involvement in major royal decisions. The reasoning given was that the family needed to present a more modern image, with younger members taking on prominent roles. As Catherine read the contents of the letter aloud, she watched as Anne's face went through a range of emotions. First confusion, then disbelief, then a deep, profound sadness that seemed to age her before Catherine's eyes. Anne had always prided herself on being indispensable to the royal family, on being the one person who could be counted on to handle any situation with grace and efficiency. "They want to put me out to pasture," Anne said quietly when Catherine finished reading. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact that hung in the air between them. Catherine reached across the desk and took Anne's hands in hers. They were cold and trembling. "And I'm so sorry. I fought against this decision. William fought against it too. But the advisors insisted that this was the best path forward for the monarchy." And looked down at their joined hands, and Catherine could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I've given everything to this family, to this institution," and whispered. "I've missed my children's milestones. I've sacrificed relationships. I've put duty before everything else in my life. And now, when Charles needs support more than ever, they want to sideline me." The room fell silent except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. Catherine felt tears of her own beginning to fall as she witnessed the breakdown of a woman who had never allowed herself to show weakness. This was Princess and The woman who had continued royal engagements with a broken hand, who had faced down kidnappers without flinching, who had been a source of strength for everyone around her for decades. "There's something else," Catherine said, her voice barely audible. She knew that what she was about to say would be the final blow, and deserved to know the complete truth. "They're planning to announce this during the Christmas broadcast. Charles will use the opportunity to introduce the changes as part of his vision for a modern monarchy." Anne's head snapped up, her eyes now filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. "They're going to humiliate me publicly? Make it seem like I'm stepping back voluntarily when nothing could be further from the truth." Catherine squeezed Anne's hands tighter. "That's why I'm telling you now. So you have time to decide how you want to handle this. So you can have some control over your own narrative." The two women sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Catherine could see and processing the information, her sharp mind working through the implications and considering her options. Finally, Anne spoke, her voice stronger now, though still heavy with emotion. "What would you do, Catherine? If you were in my position, what would you do?" It was a question that Catherine had been dreading, because she knew that whatever advice she gave would have far-reaching consequences. She thought about her own journey into the royal family, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned about survival in an institution that could be both nurturing and cruel. "I would remember who I am," Catherine said finally. "I would remember that princess and is not just a title or a role. You are a woman of substance with decades of experience and wisdom that this family needs now more than ever. You have earned the right to be heard, and you have earned the right to make your own decisions about your future." And nodded slowly, wiping away the tears that had finally begun to fall freely. "You're right, of course. But knowing that and acting on it are two different things." Catherine stood up and moved around the desk to embrace, and as she held the older woman, she could feel the weight of years of suppressed emotion finally being released, and cried quietly against Catherine's shoulder. And Catherine found herself crying too, for the unfairness of it all, for the sacrifices that had been demanded and given, and for the uncertain future that lay ahead. When Anne finally pulled back, her eyes were red but determined. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I know this couldn't have been easy for you." Catherine smiled through her tears. "We're family, Anne. Real family. That means we protect each other, even when it's difficult." And stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked grounds of Windsor. "You know, when I was a little girl, I used to dream about what my life would be like. I imagined myself as an ordinary woman, with an ordinary husband and ordinary children. I thought about having a small house with a garden where I could grow my own vegetables and raise horses." She turned back to Catherine, a wistful smile on her face. "It's funny how life takes you in directions you never expected. I wouldn't trade my life or the service I've been able to give, but sometimes I wonder what that other life might have been like." Catherine joined her at the window. "It's not too late, you know. You could still have some of those things. Maybe this is an opportunity rather than an ending." And considered this for a moment. "Perhaps you're right. But first, I need to decide how to handle this situation with Charles and the palace. I won't be pushed aside quietly, and I won't allow them to rewrite my story without my input." As the afternoon wore on, the two women talked about strategies and options. Catherine shared insights about dealing with palace politics that she had learned through her own experiences and drew on decades of knowledge about how the royal machine operated. Together, they began to formulate a plan that would allow and to maintain her dignity while protecting the family's interests. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Prince William entered, his face grave with concern. "Catherine, I've been looking for you. I heard about the letter." William looked at his aunt, noticing her red-rimmed eyes and the tissue box that had been placed on the desk. His face softened with compassion. "Aunt Anne, I want you to know that I had no part in this decision. If anything, I argued against it," and managed a small smile. "I know, William. Catherine told me. But you're going to be king someday, and you need to learn that sometimes the crown demands difficult choices." William shook his head firmly. "Not like this. not without consultation, and not without consideration for everything you've given to this family." He paused, then added, "I've called a family meeting for tomorrow morning. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about the future," and looked surprised. "William, you can't challenge the advisor's recommendations. It will create a constitutional crisis." "Let me worry about that," William replied. "Some things are more important than protocol, and family loyalty is one of them." Catherine felt a surge of pride for her husband. This was the kind of leadership that would serve him well as king, the ability to balance duty with compassion, tradition with innovation. As William left to make additional arrangements for the family meeting, Catherine and continued their conversation. They talked about the changes that would be necessary regardless of how the political situation played out, about the challenges facing the monarchy in the modern era, and about the role that each family member could play in ensuring its survival and relevance. "You know," and said as the evening shadows began to lengthen, "perhaps this crisis is exactly what we needed. It's forcing us to examine our assumptions and to have conversations that we've been avoiding for years." Catherine nodded. Change is never easy, especially for an institution that values tradition as much as we do. But maybe that's exactly why we need people like you involved in shaping that change. You understand both the importance of tradition and the necessity of adaptation. As they prepared to leave the sitting room, and turned to Catherine one more time. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever decisions are made, I want you to know how grateful I am that you're part of this family. You've brought a perspective and a strength that we desperately needed." Catherine hugged, and again, "We'll get through this together," she promised. "All of us." As they walked down the corridor together, both women knew that tomorrow would bring challenges and difficult conversations. But they also knew that they had each other, and they had the strength that comes from facing truth honestly and standing up for what is right. The storm outside was beginning to pass, and the first rays of evening sunlight were breaking through the clouds. It seemed like a good omen for the difficult days ahead. The morning sun filtered through the grand windows of the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the ornate carpet where the royal family had gathered for what would become one of the most significant meetings in recent royal history. Catherine arrived early, her stomach tight with anxiety about what the day would bring. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about the conversation she'd had with Princess and the potential consequences of the family meeting that William had called. King Charles III entered the room looking older than his years, the weight of his condition evident in the way he moved carefully to his chair. His personal physician had cleared him for the meeting, but Catherine could see the toll that recent weeks had taken on him. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his usually impeccable posture showed signs of the fatigue that had become his constant companion. Princess Anne arrived precisely on time, dressed in a navy blue suit that conveyed both professionalism and defiance. She had clearly spent time preparing for this confrontation, and Catherine could see a steely determination in her eyes that hadn't been there the previous afternoon, and nodded politely to everyone present, but remained standing until Charles gestured for her to take her seat. Prince William entered with his private secretary, carrying a folder of documents that Catherine knew contained alternative proposals to the palace advisor's recommendations. Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, completed the family gathering, both looking puzzled about the urgent nature of the meeting. The palace's senior advisors were notably absent from this gathering, a deliberate choice by William to ensure that the family could speak freely without the political constraints that usually governed such discussions. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, had protested this decision, but William had been firm in his insistence that this be a family-only conversation. Charles opened the meeting with a heavy sigh. "I assume we're all aware of why we're here," he began, his voice carrying the weariness that had become increasingly apparent in recent weeks. "The medical reports have been shared with senior family members, and I know there's been discussion about the proposed changes to our royal duties and responsibilities," and leaned forward in her chair. "Charles, before we discuss anything else, I need to know, Were you aware of the specific recommendations regarding my role when you approved them? The king's face flushed slightly, and he avoided direct eye contact with his sister. The advisors presented several options for restructuring our public roles to accommodate my health situation. I may not have reviewed every detail as thoroughly as I should have. That's not an answer, Anne replied, her voice steady but firm. Did you know that they were recommending my virtual retirement from public duties? Did you know they plan to announce this during your Christmas broadcast without consulting me? The room fell silent. Edward and Sophie exchanged glances, clearly learning about these developments for the first time. William reached for Catherine's hand under the table, squeezing it gently as they watched the confrontation unfold. Charles finally met his sister's gaze. I knew there were discussions about redistributing responsibilities among the younger generation. I didn't realize the extent to which your role would be affected, and I certainly didn't know about the timeline for announcements. Anne's composure cracked slightly. 45 years, Charles. I've been performing royal duties for 45 years. I've never missed an engagement due to personal preference, never complained about the schedule, never asked for special treatment. And this is how my service is valued. Catherine watched as tears began to form in Anne's eyes again, remembering how devastating the previous day's revelations had been for the Princess Royal. She felt compelled to speak up, knowing that her unique position as both family member and relative newcomer gave her a perspective that might be valuable. Your Majesty, Catherine began, using the formal address to emphasize the seriousness of her words. I understand the pressure you're under to modernize the monarchy and prepare for the future. But Princess and represents continuity and experience that cannot be replaced. She has institutional knowledge and public respect that took decades to build. William nodded in agreement. Catherine's right. The public sees, and as the embodiment of duty and service, pushing her aside without justification would damage the monarchy's reputation at a time when we can least afford it. Sophie, who had remained quiet until now, added her voice to the discussion. And you've been my mentor since I joined this family. Your guidance helped me navigate the complexities of royal life, and your example showed me what true service looks like. I can't imagine the royal family without your active involvement, and wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Thank you all, but the reality is that change is inevitable. The question is whether that change will be managed thoughtfully, with respect for those who have served faithfully, or whether it will be imposed arbitrarily by advisors who see people as replaceable pieces on a chessboard. Charles struggled to find the right words. His illness had affected not just his physical health, but also his ability to think clearly under pressure. The medications he was taking for his condition sometimes left him feeling foggy and uncertain, making important decisions even more challenging. I never intended for you to feel devalued or discarded, Charles said finally. Perhaps I've been too willing to delegate these decisions to others when I should have been more involved myself. William saw an opening and pulled out the folder he had brought. I've been working with my team on alternative proposals that would address the need for modernization while preserving the strengths that each family member brings. Would you like to review them? As William spread the documents across the table, Catherine could see that he had put considerable thought into these alternatives. The proposals included a graduated transition plan that would allow and to mentor younger royals while gradually reducing her schedule rather than an abrupt retirement. They also included provisions for and to play a key role in strategic planning and institutional memory preservation, and studied the documents carefully, her professional demeanor returning as she analyzed the details. These proposals show actual understanding of what each role contributes to the monarchy's effectiveness, she observed. This isn't about age discrimination or forced modernization. It's about building on existing strengths while adapting to new realities. Edward, who had been largely silent during the discussion, finally spoke up. I think we need to acknowledge that the current system of advisory committees may not be serving the family's best interests. When advisors can make recommendations about family members' futures without adequate consultation, something is fundamentally wrong with our decision-making process. This comment opened up a broader discussion about governance within the royal family. Catherine listened as they debated the balance between constitutional obligations, public expectations, and personal autonomy. She realized that the issue and faced was symptomatic of larger systemic problems that have been building for years. Perhaps this crisis is an opportunity, Catherine suggested. We could use this situation to implement reforms that ensure family members have input into decisions affecting their roles, while still maintaining the flexibility needed to adapt to changing circumstances. Charles nodded slowly. You may be right, but implementing such changes would require delicate negotiations with the government and constitutional experts. The monarchy's relationship with elected officials has always been carefully balanced, and have been studying William's proposals during this broader discussion. These alternatives address my immediate concerns, she said, but they also raise questions about implementation. How do we present changes to the public in a way that doesn't suggest internal conflict or indecision? William smiled for the first time during the meeting. That's where Catherine's expertise becomes invaluable. She's mastered the art of presenting necessary changes as positive evolution rather than crisis management. Catherine felt the weight of expectation as all eyes turned to her. The key is transparency and authenticity, she said. The public respects honesty about challenges, especially when it's paired with clear plans for addressing them. We could present this as the royal family taking proactive steps to ensure continuity and effectiveness during a period of transition. Sophie leaned forward with interest. That approach would also allow us to highlight the positive aspects of change while acknowledging the valuable contributions that continue to be made by experienced family members. As the discussion continued, Catherine could see the dynamics in the room shifting. What had begun as a confrontation between Charles and was evolving into a collaborative planning session. The tension that had dominated the early part of the meeting was giving way to the kind of productive problem-solving that characterized the royal family at its best. Anne's demeanor had transformed as well. The hurt and anger that had been so evident when she arrived were being replaced by the focused determination that had made her one of the monarchy's most effective members. She was engaging with the proposals not as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, but as an active participant in shaping the family's future. There's one more issue we need to address, Anne said, her voice now strong and confident. The Christmas broadcast announcement. If we're going to implement these alternative proposals, we need to coordinate the public communication strategy carefully. Charles looked relieved that and was willing to engage constructively with the timing issues. What would you suggest? Anne smiled slightly, and Catherine could see the strategic mind that had served the royal family so well over the decades. I suggest we present the changes as a planned transition that builds on the monarchy's strengths while preparing for future challenges. Rather than announcing my reduced schedule as a response to your health issues, we present it as part of a comprehensive modernization plan. William nodded enthusiastically. That approach would also allow us to emphasize the mentoring aspects of the transition and could be presented as taking on a senior advisory role while continuing with selected public engagements. Catherine could see the wisdom in this approach. It would also give us the opportunity to highlight the depth and experience within the royal family, rather than creating the impression that we're scrambling to address unexpected problems. Edward added his support to the evolving plan. This approach would also provide a template for future transitions. Rather than ad hoc responses to crises, we would have an established process for managing changes in roles and responsibilities. As the morning progressed, the family worked together to refine the proposals and develop an implementation timeline. Catherine was struck by how effectively they functioned as a team when freed from the constraints of formal protocol and outside advisors. Each person brought unique perspectives and experiences that enriched the discussion. Sophie shared insights from her own transition into royal life, highlighting the importance of having experienced family members available for guidance and support. Edward contributed his understanding of the legal and constitutional implications of various changes. William brought strategic thinking and knowledge of public expectations, while provided institutional memory and practical wisdom gained from decades of service. Charles, despite his health challenges, offered valuable perspective on the political sensitivities involved in any changes to royal protocols. His experience navigating relationships with government officials and constitutional experts would be crucial in implementing the proposed reforms. Catherine found herself serving as a bridge between different viewpoints, helping family members understand each other's concerns and find common ground. Her background as an outsider who had successfully integrated into the royal family gave her unique insights into both the challenges of change and the importance of maintaining core values. By midday, they had developed a comprehensive plan that addressed not only Anne's immediate concerns, but also established framework for future decision-making within the royal family. The plan included provisions for regular family consultations on major decisions, clearly defined roles for each family member, and flexible arrangements that could adapt to changing circumstances. "I want to apologize," and Charles said as they prepared to conclude the meeting. "I should have been more involved in these decisions from the beginning. Your service and your input should never have been taken for granted," and reached across the table and squeezed her brother's hand. "We've all been under tremendous pressure, Charles. What matters is that we found a way forward that serves both the monarchy and the family." Catherine felt a sense of relief and accomplishment as the meeting drew to a close. The crisis that had seemed so overwhelming the previous day had been transformed into an opportunity for positive change. The family had demonstrated that they could work together effectively to address challenges while maintaining their commitment to service and duty. William gathered up the documents and proposals that would now need to be refined and presented to the palace advisors and government officials. "I'll work with our legal team to develop the formal proposals based on today's discussion. We should be able to present a comprehensive plan within the week." As family members began to leave the blue drawing room and approached Catherine privately, "Thank you," she said quietly. "Your courage in delivering that letter yesterday and your contributions today have made all the difference." Catherine embraced the older woman warmly. "We're family, and that means we support each other through difficult times and work together to build a better future." As they walked out of the palace together, Catherine reflected on the morning's events. The conversation that had begun with hurt feelings and institutional conflict had evolved into a collaborative effort to strengthen both the royal family and the monarchy itself. The changes that would result from this crisis would likely make the institution more resilient and more responsive to the needs of both family members and the public they served. The afternoon sun was shining brightly as they emerged from the palace, and Catherine couldn't help but see it as a positive sign for the future. The royal family had faced a significant challenge and had emerged stronger and more united than before. 3 weeks after the family meeting at Buckingham Palace, Catherine found herself standing in the same corridor where she had first held the letter that changed everything. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of dread and uncertainty, there was a sense of anticipation and purpose that had been building throughout the royal household as the new plans took shape. The implementation of the family's proposals had not been without challenges. The palace advisors had initially resisted the changes, arguing that the original recommendations had been carefully crafted to address constitutional and political considerations. Sir Clive Alderton had requested multiple meetings with King Charles, expressing concerns about setting precedents that could complicate future royal transitions. But William had proven to be a formidable advocate for the family's position. He had spent countless hours in meetings with constitutional experts, government liaisons, and senior palace staff, methodically addressing each concern and demonstrating how the alternative proposals would actually strengthen the monarchy's position. Catherine had watched with pride as her husband displayed the kind of leadership skills that would serve him well as a future king. The media had begun to notice that something significant was brewing within the royal family. Royal correspondents had started reporting on unusual patterns of meetings and consultations, speculating about potential changes to royal duties and responsibilities. The palace's press office had been fielding increasingly specific questions about future announcements and the health of various family members. Catherine had been working closely with the communications team to develop a comprehensive media strategy that would present the coming changes in the most positive light possible. Her experience dealing with intense media scrutiny had taught her the importance of controlling the narrative rather than simply reacting to speculation. Princess and had undergone a remarkable transformation during these weeks. The hurt and anger that had characterized her initial reaction to the proposed changes had evolved into a renewed sense of purpose and engagement. She had thrown herself into the planning process with characteristic thoroughness, developing detailed proposals for her new role and identifying ways to maximize her continued contributions to the royal family, and had also begun working on what she called her legacy project, a comprehensive documentation of royal protocols, traditions, and institutional knowledge that could be passed on to future generations. She had started conducting recorded interviews with long-serving palace staff, capturing stories and insights that might otherwise be lost as personnel changed over time. Catherine had said during one of their regular planning sessions, "This crisis has reminded me why I chose this life in the first place. It's not about the titles or the ceremonies. It's about service to something larger than ourselves." Catherine had been deeply moved by Anne's resilience and her ability to find meaning in difficult circumstances. The Princess Royal had become an even more important mentor and friend during this period, sharing wisdom gained from decades of navigating royal life's complexities. The king's health had stabilized somewhat during this period, partly due to reduced stress levels as the family worked together to address the institutional challenges. His medical team had reported improvements in both his physical condition and his mental outlook, attributing these changes to his renewed sense of agency in making decisions about his role and responsibilities. Charles had also begun to embrace his new relationship with his family members as collaborators rather than subordinates. The authoritarian approach that had sometimes characterized his leadership style was giving way to a more consultative model that drew on each person's strengths and expertise. "I'm learning that being king doesn't mean having all the answers," Charles had confided to Catherine during a private conversation. "It means being wise enough to surround yourself with people who can provide the knowledge and perspectives you need to make good decisions." Edward and Sophie had also found new roles in the evolving family structure. Edward had agreed to take on additional responsibilities for the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme and other educational initiatives, while Sophie had expanded her work with organizations supporting survivors of sexual violence and promoting women's rights. The collaborative approach that had emerged from the crisis was beginning to produce tangible benefits for the monarchy's public work. Instead of competing for attention or duplicating efforts, family members were coordinating their activities to maximize impact and avoid conflicts in scheduling or messaging. Catherine had been particularly pleased to see how the changes were affecting the younger generation of royals. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been too young to understand the political complexities of the situation, but they had definitely noticed the improved atmosphere during family gatherings. The children's happiness and sense of security had always been Catherine's top priority, and she was relieved that the family's challenges had been resolved without causing them distress. William had also grown as a leader during this period. Catherine had watched him develop new skills in negotiation, consensus building, and strategic communication that would serve him well throughout his future reign. He had learned to balance respect for tradition with a need for innovation, and to value input from others while still taking responsibility for difficult decisions. "I used to think that being prepared for kingship meant memorizing constitutional law and royal protocol," William had told Catherine one evening. "But I'm realizing that the most important skill is knowing how to bring people together to solve problems that none of us could handle alone. The international implications of the royal family's internal changes had also required careful management. Commonwealth leaders, foreign dignitaries, and other royal families have been watching the British monarchy's response to its challenges, and their confidence in the institution's stability was crucial for maintaining important relationships. Catherine had worked with the Foreign Office to ensure that international partners were properly informed about the coming changes and their implications for future royal visits and diplomatic activities. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing admiration for the family's proactive approach to addressing challenges. As the date for the Christmas broadcast approached, the entire royal household was focused on ensuring that the announcement would be received as intended. The speech had been carefully crafted to emphasize themes of continuity, service, and adaptation, while providing enough detail about the changes to satisfy public curiosity without revealing sensitive information about the king's health, and had insisted on reviewing every word of the sections that pertained to her role, making suggestions that improved both the accuracy and the tone of the announcement. Her input had been invaluable in striking the right balance between acknowledging change and maintaining dignity. The key is to present this as evolution rather than revolution, and had advised during one of the final planning sessions. People need to understand that we're building on our strengths, not abandoning our values. The week before the broadcast, Catherine received an invitation that surprised her. Princess Anne had asked her to attend a private ceremony at Windsor Castle, and planned to present her with a piece of jewelry that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. The invitation came with a handwritten note that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "My dear Catherine," the note read, "your courage in telling me the truth, even when it was difficult, and your wisdom in helping our family find a way forward have earned you a special place in my heart and in the history of our family. I would be honored if you would accept this gift as a symbol of my gratitude and respect." The ceremony took place in the Oak Room at Windsor, with only immediate family members present. As fastened the delicate pearl and diamond brooch to Catherine's dress, she spoke about the significance of the piece and its history within the royal family. "This brooch was one of my mother's favorites," and explained. "She wore it during some of the most challenging periods of her reign, including during the constitutional crisis of the 1990s. She always said it reminded her that even the most difficult problems could be solved with patience, wisdom, and the support of people who truly cared about the institution we serve." Catherine was deeply moved by the gesture and by Anne's words. The brooch represented not just a beautiful piece of jewelry, but a tangible connection to the long history of service and sacrifice that defined the royal family's identity. As the family gathered in the formal sitting room after the ceremony, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since that rainy afternoon when she had knocked on Anne's door with the devastating letter. The hurt and division that had threatened to tear the family apart had been replaced by a stronger sense of unity and purpose. Charles raised his glass in a toast to Catherine, acknowledging her role in guiding the family through its crisis. "To Catherine," he said, "who had the courage to speak truth when it needed to be heard, and the wisdom to help us find a path forward that honored both our past and our future." As glasses clinked around the room, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the love and acceptance she had found within this extraordinary family. The journey from outsider to insider had been long and sometimes difficult, but moments like this made every challenge worthwhile. Later that evening, as Catherine and William walked through the grounds of Windsor Castle, they talked about the lessons they had learned during the recent crisis and their hopes for the future. The moon was full, casting silver light across the ancient stones of the castle and creating an atmosphere of timeless beauty and permanence. "Do you think we'll look back on this time as a turning point?" William asked as they paused near the round tower. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I think we'll look back on it as the time when our family learned to truly work together," she replied. when we discovered that our individual strengths become even more powerful when they're combined with respect, communication, and shared purpose. William nodded in agreement. I also think it's when we learn that change doesn't have to mean abandonment of values. We can adapt and evolve while still honoring the best of our traditions. As they continued their walk, Catherine thought about Princess and the remarkable transformation she had witnessed over the past few weeks. The woman who had once seemed so invulnerable had revealed her humanity and her capacity for growth, becoming even more admirable in the process. The Christmas broadcast was now just days away, and Catherine knew that it would mark the public beginning of a new chapter for the royal family. But the real transformation had already taken place in private conversations, family meetings, and quiet moments of understanding between people who had chosen to trust each other with their fears, hopes, and dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, Catherine felt confident that the royal family was better prepared than ever to face whatever the future might hold. They had learned that their greatest strength lay not in their individual abilities, but in their commitment to supporting each other through every triumph and every trial. The lights of Windsor Castle twinkled in the distance as Catherine and William made their way back toward the family quarters, hand in hand, ready to continue building the future they had planned together. Christmas morning arrived with a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror the new sense of purpose within the royal family. Catherine woke early in her rooms at Sandringham House, where the family had gathered for their traditional holiday celebration. Through her window, she could see frost covering the Norfolk countryside, creating a winter wonderland that felt appropriately magical for such a significant day. Today would mark the public announcement of the changes that the family had spent weeks planning and preparing. King Charles's Christmas broadcast would be delivered from the library at Sandringham, and Catherine knew that millions of people around the world would be listening carefully for any hints about the monarchy's future direction. The past week had been intensive with final preparations. Speech writers, constitutional experts, media advisors, and senior palace officials had worked around the clock to ensure that every word of the broadcast would convey exactly the right message. The challenge was to acknowledge the changes while maintaining public confidence in the stability and continuity of the monarchy. Princess Anne had spent the morning reviewing her own statement, which would be released simultaneously with the king's broadcast. Her words had been carefully crafted to express both pride in her decades of service and enthusiasm for her evolving role. Catherine had helped and practiced the delivery, ensuring that her natural warmth and sincerity would come through despite the formal language required for such occasions. I never imagined that at this stage of my life I would be embarking on a new chapter, and had told Catherine during one of their rehearsal sessions. But I'm discovering that there's something energizing about the prospect of contributing in different ways to something I've always cared about deeply. The transformation in Anne's outlook had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire experience. What had initially seemed like a forced retirement had evolved into an opportunity for her to leverage her experience and wisdom in new ways. The mentoring role she would be taking on with younger royals had already begun informally, and the early results were promising. William had been managing the final coordination between the palace, Downing Street, and Commonwealth governments. The international implications of royal succession planning required delicate diplomatic handling, and William had proven himself capable of managing these complex relationships with skill and sensitivity. The key has been transparency, William had explained to Catherine. Instead of trying to manage perceptions from a distance, we've brought key stakeholders into the conversation early enough that they feel like partners rather than observers. Catherine had been working with the palace communications team to prepare for the inevitable media response to the announcements. They had developed talking points for various scenarios, prepared materials for royal correspondence, and established protocols for handling interview requests and public appearances in the days following the broadcast. The children had been told that today would be special, but in terms they could understand. Prince George, now old enough to grasp some of the complexities of royal life, had asked thoughtful questions about why his great-aunt and was changing her job. Catherine and William had explained it as a way for her and to help teach other family members while still doing important work for the country. Princess Charlotte had been most interested in the fact that there would be cameras in the house for the broadcast. Her natural curiosity about media and public attention had led to several amusing moments as she tried to understand why some conversations were private while others were shared with the whole world. Prince Louis, still young enough to be focused on Christmas presents and holiday activities, had been blissfully unaware of the broader significance of the day. His excitement about opening gifts and spending time with his extended family provided a welcome reminder of what really mattered most during the holiday season. As the family gathered for Christmas morning services at St. Mary Magdalene Church, Catherine was struck by the sense of unity and purpose that characterized their interactions. The tensions and uncertainties that had marked recent weeks have been replaced by a shared commitment to making the announced changes successful. Charles looked stronger and more confident than he had in months. The clarity about his role and the support of his family had clearly improved his physical and mental well-being. His handshake was firmer, his smile more genuine, and his voice stronger during their private conversations. The church service provided a moment of reflection and perspective for everyone involved. The familiar hymns and readings offered comfort and continuity, reminding the family of the deeper values and commitments that transcended the political and institutional challenges they faced. After the service, the family returned to Sandringham for their traditional Christmas dinner before the afternoon broadcast. The conversation around the dinner table was warm and relaxed, with everyone making an effort to maintain the holiday atmosphere despite the significance of what lay ahead, and had requested to sit next to Catherine during dinner, and they talked quietly about the emotions she was feeling as she prepared for her public statement. "I keep thinking about my mother and what she would say about all of this," and confided. "I believe she would be proud that we found a way to adapt without compromising our core mission." Catherine squeezed Anne's hand under the table. "I'm certain she would be proud, not just of the solution we found, but of the way the family pulled together to find it. That's the real legacy she left us, the understanding that we're stronger together than we could ever be individually." As the afternoon approached, the technical teams arrived to prepare for the broadcast. The library at Sandringham had been chosen as the location because of its warm, personal atmosphere and its connection to the family's private life. The setting would help convey the message that these changes emerged from thoughtful family deliberation rather than external pressure. Charles spent time in private preparation, reviewing his speech one final time, and working with a voice coach to ensure clear delivery despite the medications that sometimes affected his speech patterns. Catherine had suggested including personal reflections about family support and collaboration, which had become some of the most powerful elements of the final address. William and Catherine positioned themselves in an adjacent room where they could watch the broadcast, but remain available if needed for any last-minute adjustments. They had been through multiple rehearsals, but everyone knew that live broadcasting could present unexpected challenges. Princess Anne was in her own study, where she would participate in the broadcast remotely via video link. This arrangement had been carefully planned to show both her continued integration in family decisions and her new independence in managing her public role. As the cameras began rolling, Catherine felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and anticipation that accompanied all major royal announcements. So much depended on public reception of a message, and despite all their careful preparation, there was always the possibility of misunderstandings or negative reactions. King Charles began the broadcast with traditional Christmas greetings, acknowledging the challenges that many families across the Commonwealth were facing while expressing optimism about the future. His voice was strong and clear, carrying the authority that came from decades of preparation for his role. When he began discussing the changes to royal duties and responsibilities, his tone became more personal and reflective. "The monarchy has always evolved to meet the needs of changing times," he said, looking directly into the camera. "This Christmas, I want to share with you some of the changes we are making to ensure that our service to you continues to be effective and meaningful." Catherine watched as Charles explained the rationale for redistributing royal duties, emphasizing themes of continuity, experience, and adaptation. He spoke about Princess Anne's invaluable contributions and her new role in mentoring and strategic planning without suggesting that her involvement was being reduced against her will. "Princess Anne has been the backbone of our family's public service for nearly 5 decades, Charles said with obvious pride. Her experience and wisdom will now be focused on ensuring that the next generation of royals is prepared to serve with the same dedication and effectiveness that has characterized her remarkable career. When Anne appeared on screen to deliver her own statement, Catherine was proud to see how confident and graceful she appeared. The hurt and anger that had characterized their initial conversations had been completely replaced by dignity and purposefulness. "I'm honored to take on new responsibilities that will allow me to share what I have learned while continuing to serve the causes and organizations that matter most to me," and said. "This transition represents evolution, not ending, and I am excited about the opportunities it will create for our family to serve even more effectively." The broadcast continued with Charles discussing his health in general terms, acknowledging that he was managing a chronic condition while emphasizing his commitment to fulfilling his constitutional duties with appropriate support. The approach was honest without being alarmist, informative without being overly personal. William's expanded role was presented as a natural progression in his preparation for eventual kingship, with specific emphasis on his collaboration with experienced family members. The message was clear that increased responsibility came with increased support and guidance rather than premature independence. As the broadcast concluded with traditional Christmas wishes and expressions of gratitude for public support, Catherine felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. The message had been delivered clearly and warmly, striking the right balance between acknowledging change and providing reassurance about continuity. The immediate response from media commentators was overwhelmingly positive. Royal correspondents praised the transparency of the announcements and the thoughtful way the changes had been presented. Political leaders from across the Commonwealth issued statements expressing confidence in the monarchy's continued effectiveness. Public reaction on social media was also encouraging, with many people expressing admiration for Princess Anne's service and support for her new role. The family's approach of presenting change as evolution rather than crisis seemed to resonate with people who valued both tradition and adaptation. In the days following the broadcast, Catherine watched as the new arrangements began to take effect and threw herself into her mentoring responsibilities with enthusiasm, working closely with younger royals to help them develop their own public personas and causes. The international response was particularly gratifying. Commonwealth leaders expressed appreciation for being consulted about the changes in advance, and several mentioned that they saw the royal family's collaborative approach as a model for their own governmental transitions. 2 weeks after the broadcast, Catherine found herself once again in the corridor at Windsor Castle, where the entire journey had begun. This time, she was carrying an invitation rather than a devastating letter. Princess Anne had asked her to attend a small ceremony marking the official beginning of Anne's new role. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with and receiving a new royal cipher that reflected her evolving responsibilities. King Charles presented the cipher personally, acknowledging both Anne's past service and her future contributions. "This represents not an ending, but a beginning," Charles said as he presented the cipher. "A recognition that true service is not measured in years, but in impact, and that wisdom grows more valuable with experience." Anne's response was brief, but heartfelt. "I have learned that change can be a gift when it comes with the support and understanding of people who share your values and commitments. I am grateful for this opportunity to serve in new ways while building on everything that has brought meaning to my life." As the small audience applauded, Catherine reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a crisis threatening to divide the family had become an opportunity for them to work together more effectively than ever before. The following month brought further evidence of the success of their approach. Public approval ratings for the royal family reached levels not seen in years, with particular increases in support for Princess and appreciation for King Charles's leadership during the transition. More importantly, the family's internal dynamics had been transformed. Regular consultation meetings became a permanent feature of royal planning, ensuring that all family members had input into decisions affecting their roles and responsibilities. Catherine's own role had evolved as well. She found herself serving as an informal advisor and mediator, helping to facilitate communication and understanding between family members with different perspectives and experiences. "You've become the heart of our family in many ways," and told Catherine during one of their regular conversations. "Not just through marriage to William, but through your ability to help us understand each other and work together more effectively." As spring arrived and the new arrangements settled into routine, Catherine often thought about the afternoon when she had carried that letter to Princess, and the conversation that had begun with tears and conflict had ultimately led to stronger relationships, better communication, and more effective service to the people they were privileged to represent. The royal family had learned that their greatest challenges could become their greatest opportunities when they faced them together with honesty, respect, and commitment to their shared mission. It was a lesson that would serve them well in all the years to come, as they continued adapting and evolving while maintaining the values that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change. Standing once again in the corridor where it all began, Catherine smiled as she remembered Princess's tears and her own whispered words of comfort and support. Sometimes, she realized, the most important conversations begin with the most difficult truths, but they can end with the strongest bonds of understanding and love.